She knocked on a stranger's window covered in blood, clutching her son, with nowhere left to run, and a cold billionaire inside made a decision in 3 seconds that would destroy them both. Because the man hunting her wasn't just an abusive ex anymore, he was being paid by someone far more dangerous to make sure she disappeared. Welcome back, my strong family and friends, to Mr. Crown Stories. If no one told you today, hear this: you are enough. You are worthy. You are the survivor who chose to run towards safety instead of staying in danger. I make these stories for hearts like yours, bruised but beating, scared but still standing, hoping for the sunrise after the longest night. If this touches your soul, click subscribe, drop "I'm here" in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I'll share another story of hope rising from fear, and you don't want to miss it. May your heart find courage, your path find light, and your tomorrow find peace. Now, let us begin. The parking lot stretched before her like an ocean of darkness. Irene's side throbbed where Timmy's elbow had caught her ribs during the struggle. Her white tank top, soaked through with rain, clung to her trembling body. Somewhere behind her, she didn't dare look, she could hear him gaining ground. "Ezra, baby, hold on tight," she gasped, adjusting her grip on her 20-month-old son. His whimpers tore at her heart more than any physical pain could. "Mama," he sobbed into her neck. "Scared." I know. Her voice cracked. She'd lost her shoes 3 blocks back when she'd kicked them off to run faster. Now every step sent jolts of pain through her feet as they struck gravel and broken glass. The industrial district was empty at this hour, past midnight, warehouses closed, no witnesses, just shadows and rain and Timmy's rage echoing through the storm. She'd thought they were safe in that apartment. She'd thought he wouldn't find them this time. She'd been wrong. "You really thought you could hide?" Timmy's voice cut through the downpour, closer than before. "I always find you, Irene. Always." Her heart hammered against her ribs, so hard she thought they might crack. Ezra's fingers tightened around her neck until she could barely breathe, but she didn't loosen his grip. She wouldn't. She'd run until her legs gave out if it meant keeping him safe. Then she saw it. Through the sheets of rain and the blur of her tears, a sleek black sedan sat idling beneath a flickering streetlight. The windows were dark, tinted, but she could see the faint blue glow of a phone screen inside. Someone was there. Without thinking, without planning, driven by nothing but the primal instinct to protect her child, Irene stumbled toward the car. Her bloody hand, cut during the struggle when she grabbed the kitchen knife to defend herself, slammed against the passenger window. The smear of red against pristine black glass looked like a scream. The window rolled down slowly. A man's face appeared. Sharp features. Dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything in a single glance. A jawline carved from stone. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent, and his black hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour. "Please," the word ripped from Irene's throat. "Please, he's right there. Hide me. I'm begging you." The man's eyes flickered from her face to Ezra's terrified expression, then past her shoulder to the figure splashing through puddles in the distance. His expression didn't change. But something shifted in those dark eyes, something like recognition. Like he'd seen this nightmare before. "Get in. Both of you. Now." He didn't ask questions. Didn't hesitate. Didn't demand explanations. He simply reached across and unlocked the door from inside. Irene yanked it open and practically threw Ezra into the back seat before diving in after him. The moment the door slammed shut, the man pressed the lock button. The sound of all 4 doors locking simultaneously was the most beautiful sound Irene had ever heard. Timmy reached the car 3 seconds later. His face appeared at the window like something from a horror film, features twisted with rage, fist pounding against the glass. "That's my woman. My kid," he screamed. "You have no right." The man in the driver's seat didn't even glance at Timmy. He simply shifted into gear, and the engine purred to life beneath them. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Timmy's shouts to fade into the storm behind them. Irene collapsed against the leather seat, pulling Ezra onto her lap. Her son buried his face in her neck, his small body shaking with sobs that broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice splintering. "Thank you so much. I didn't know where else to go. I saw your car and... You're bleeding." The man's voice was deep, controlled, the kind of voice used to giving orders and being obeyed. But underneath the authority, there was something else. Something almost gentle. Irene looked down at herself. Blood seeped from the cut on her forearm where she'd grabbed the knife blade. Her lip was split from when Timmy had backhanded her. She could feel her left eye swelling shut. "It's not as bad as it looks," she lied automatically. "Yes, it is." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his dark eyes meeting hers for just a moment before returning to the road. "I'm taking you to a medical facility. Private. No questions asked. They'll treat both of you." "I can't afford," Irene started, panic rising in her chest. "I didn't ask if you could afford it," he cut her off, his tone firm but not unkind. "I said I'm taking you there." Something in his voice told her arguing would be pointless. Besides, warm blood still trickled down her arm. Ezra needed to be checked for injuries too. She couldn't risk him being hurt and not knowing it. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. There was a pause. The man's hands gripped the steering wheel with controlled strength. He wore an expensive watch on his left wrist, and his suit jacket fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Gerald Carey. The name hit Irene like a physical blow. Even through her fear and pain, she recognized it. Everyone in the city knew that name. Gerald Carey, the billionaire CEO who'd built his empire from nothing. The man the business world called the Ice King. The man whose cold reputation preceded him everywhere. And she'd just thrown herself and her son into his car, covered in blood and terror, begging for help. "I'm Irene," she said softly. "This is Ezra." Gerald nodded once, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Rain drummed against the roof of the car, but inside it was warm and quiet and safe. For the first time in what felt like years, Irene felt like she could breathe. "Mama," Ezra whispered, peeking out from where he'd hidden his face. "Bad man gone." "Yes, baby. He's gone. We're safe now." "The man driving," Ezra said, his voice barely audible. "Is he good?" Irene looked at the back of Gerald's head, at the rigid set of his shoulders, at the way his jaw tightened slightly when Ezra asked his innocent question. She saw the way his hands had moved without hesitation to unlock the doors. The way he'd driven away without demanding explanations. The way he'd said both of you like Ezra's safety mattered just as much as hers. "Yes," Irene heard herself say, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "He's a good man." They drove through the city streets, leaving the industrial district behind. The buildings grew taller, sleeker, more modern. The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood from the window where Irene's hand had left its desperate mark. In the driver's seat, Gerald Carey's expression remained unreadable. But his knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and in the rearview mirror, Irene thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Something that looked like remembered pain. Something that looked like a promise being made. Gerald pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building Irene didn't recognize. The structure was all glass and steel, modern and imposing, with security cameras visible at every angle. He parked in a space marked reserved, "Carry," and killed the engine. The silence that followed felt thick, heavy with unspoken questions. "Where are we?" Irene asked, her voice hoarse. "Somewhere safe." Gerald opened his door and came around to open hers. He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd her space. He simply stood back and waited, giving her the choice to move on her own terms. Irene clutched Ezra tighter and stepped out of the car. Her legs felt like water beneath her, threatening to buckle with every step. Gerald noticed. She saw his hand twitch slightly, as if preparing to catch her, but he held back. They took a private elevator to the 10th floor. The medical facility that greeted them looked nothing like any hospital Irene had ever seen. Soft recessed lighting. Comfortable seating in muted grays and blues. Abstract art on the walls. Everything whispered wealth and discretion. A woman in her 50s appeared immediately, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression professional but kind. She wore scrubs, but even those looked expensive. "Mr. Carey," she said, nodding respectfully. "Dr. Stevens." Gerald's voice remained that same controlled tone. "This is Irene Switzer and her son, Ezra. They need immediate treatment. Put everything on my account. No paperwork. No questions." Dr. Stevens's gaze moved to Irene, taking in the blood, the swelling, the way she held her son like he might disappear if she loosened her grip. Understanding flickered across the doctor's face, the kind of understanding that came from seeing this before. "Of course," Dr. Stevens said gently. "Come with me, dear. Let's get you both taken care of." Irene hesitated, her eyes darting back to Gerald. Part of her feared this was temporary, that the moment she walked through those doors, he'd leave and she'd wake up back in the nightmare. "I'll be right here," Gerald said, as if reading her thoughts. His dark eyes held hers. "I'm not going anywhere." Something in his voice, something steady and unmovable, made her believe him. The examination room was warm. Dr. Stevens worked with efficient gentleness, cleaning the cut on Irene's forearm first. The wound was deeper than Irene had realized, the edges jagged from where the knife had slipped in her grip. "This needs stitches," Dr. Stevens said quietly. 8, maybe 9. Irene nodded, her jaw tight. She'd been through worse. She could handle this. But when the needle pierced her skin for the first stitch, something inside her broke. The tears came without warning, hot, violent, unstoppable. Her shoulders shook with sobs she'd been holding back for hours, maybe months, maybe years. Everything she'd been running from crashed down on her at once. The fear, the exhaustion, the shame of not being able to protect her son better, the relief of finally, being somewhere Timmy couldn't reach them. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm sorry, Don't apologize." Dr. Stevens's hand was warm on her shoulder. "You've been holding this in for too long. Let it out." Through her tears, Irene became aware of a small presence beside her. A nurse had brought Ezra into the room, freshly checked and thankfully uninjured. He pressed against her leg, his little hand patting her knee. "Don't cry, Mama," he whispered. "We safe now." Those words, so simple, so hopeful, nearly destroyed her. Through the glass partition separating the exam room from the waiting area, Gerald Carey stood perfectly still. To anyone watching, he looked cold, unmoved, detached. But his hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and his jaw worked with tension he couldn't quite hide. He watched Irene break down. Watched her son try to comfort her. Watched the doctor work to piece together what violence had torn apart. And he remembered. The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. He was 7 years old, hiding in the closet, small hands pressed over his ears to block out the sounds. His mother's voice, pleading. His father's voice, roaring. The crack of flesh meeting flesh. The crash of something breaking, furniture or bones, Gerald couldn't tell. When it finally went quiet, he'd crawled out of the closet. His mother sat on the kitchen floor, her face bruised, her lip bleeding. She looked up when she saw him, and her eyes, those eyes, filled with a terror that had nothing to do with physical pain. "Run," she'd whispered, her voice breaking. "When you're old enough, you run. You get out. You don't look back." But Gerald hadn't run. He'd been too young, too powerless, too small. And 6 months later, his mother was dead. His father called it an accident. The police called it domestic situation. The courts called it insufficient evidence. Gerald called it what it was, murder. He blinked, pulling himself back to the present. His hands were shaking. He forced them still. Dr. Stevens emerged from the exam room 30 minutes later, her expression calm but serious. "The cut required 8 stitches, she said quietly. "Her lip will heal on its own. The eye is swollen but not damaged. She'll have significant bruising for the next week or 2. She paused. "The boy is physically unharmed, but he shows signs of severe stress and anxiety. They'll both need counseling, Mr. Carey. What they've been through, what they've likely been going through for some time, it leaves scars we can't see." Gerald nodded once. "Arrange it." Whatever they need. I will. Dr. Stevens studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp. You did a good thing tonight. Gerald didn't respond. Good wasn't a word people usually associated with him. Ruthless. Cold. Calculating. Those were the words that followed his name. When Irene emerged from the exam room, she looked small and fragile in borrowed scrubs. Her arm was bandaged, her face cleaned but marked with darkening bruises. Ezra held her hand, his eyes wide and watchful. Thank you, Irene said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this. For all of this. I'm so sorry I dragged you into my nightmare. You were just sitting in your car, and her voice cracked. I'm sorry. Gerald's expression remained unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was firm, almost harsh. I don't help people because it's convenient, Irene. I help because I choose to. You didn't drag me into anything. I made a decision. End of discussion. Irene flinched slightly at his tone, but something in his words, the certainty of them, seemed to settle her. It's 3 a.m, Gerald continued. You both need rest. I've arranged a suite at one of my hotels. Secure. Private. No one will find you there. A hotel. Irene's eyes widened. I don't have money for. Gerald held up one hand, cutting her off. When I offer help, I mean it. I don't expect payment. I don't expect anything in return. You needed help. I'm giving it. That's the end of the discussion. His tone left no room for argument, but underneath the authority, Irene heard something else. Something almost protective. She nodded slowly, too exhausted to fight. They took the elevator back down to the parking garage in silence. Ezra had grown heavier in Irene's arms, his head drooping against her shoulder as sleep tried to claim him. But every few seconds, his body would jerk awake, as if some part of him was afraid to let his guard down. As Gerald opened the car door for them, Ezra lifted his head. His dark eyes, so much older than they should be, fixed on Gerald's face. Mr. Ezra said, his voice soft but clear. Are you a good man? Gerald froze. The question hung in the air between them, innocent and devastating. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Irene saw something flicker across his face. Pain, maybe, or memory, or both. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its hard edge. It was quieter now, almost gentle. I try to be. Ezra studied him for another long moment, then nodded, satisfied. He laid his head back down on his mother's shoulder and closed his eyes. Gerald's jaw tightened. He turned away quickly, moving to the driver's side door. But Irene had seen it, the crack in his armor, the glimpse of something human beneath the ice. As they drove through the empty city streets toward safety, Irene found herself wondering about the man who'd saved them. About what had put that pain in his eyes. About why he'd opened his door without hesitation when so many others would have driven away. In the driver's seat, Gerald Carey stared straight ahead, his hand steady on the wheel, his expression unreadable once more. But his mother's voice echoed in his memory, run. When you're old enough, you run. She'd never gotten the chance. But tonight, he'd made sure Irene and Ezra did. Irene woke to sunlight. For a moment, a beautiful, disorienting moment, she didn't remember where she was. The sheets beneath her were impossibly soft, the mattress cradling her body like a cloud. The pillow smelled clean, like lavender and something expensive she couldn't name. Then memory crashed back, the rain, the blood, Timmy's voice, Gerald's car. She bolted upright, her heart hammering. Ezra. Mama, I'm here. His small voice came from beside the bed. Irene looked down and found her son sitting on a plush rug, surrounded by toys she didn't recognize. Wooden blocks, stuffed animals, picture books. He held a teddy bear almost as big as he was, his face peaceful in a way she hadn't seen in months. She looked around, really seeing the room for the first time. The penthouse suite was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, the morning light streaming through to illuminate cream-colored walls and elegant furniture. The bed she'd slept in was king-sized, dressed in linens that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. A sitting area occupied one corner, complete with a leather sofa and flat-screen television. Through an open door, she glimpsed a bathroom with marble countertops and a tub large enough to swim in. This wasn't a hotel room. This was a palace. Irene felt her chest tighten. The luxury felt wrong somehow, like she didn't belong here. Like she was dirtying something pristine just by being in it. She slid out of bed, still wearing the borrowed scrubs from the medical facility, and moved to the window. 30 stories below, the city moved in organized chaos. Cars, people, life continuing as if the world hadn't nearly ended last night. A knock at the door made her jump. "It's okay, Mama," Ezra said, clutching his new teddy bear. The man said he'd bring food. The door opened before Irene could respond. A security guard stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered professional, and nodded respectfully. "Ms. Switzer, Mr. Carey is here with breakfast." Gerald entered behind him, carrying a covered tray. He wore a different suit today, navy instead of charcoal, but his expression was the same, controlled, unreadable, distant. Yet there was something in his eyes when he looked at Ezra that softened the sharp edges of his face. "Good morning," Gerald said. He set the tray on the coffee table in the sitting area. "I wasn't sure what you'd want, so I ordered options." He lifted the covers to reveal French toast, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, yogurt, juice, and milk. The smell made Irene's stomach clench with hunger she'd been ignoring. "Gel." Ezra dropped his teddy bear and toddled toward Gerald with surprising confidence. Gerald's eyebrows rose slightly at the nickname, but he crouched down to Ezra's level. "Good morning, Ezra. Did you sleep well?" Ezra nodded enthusiastically. "Big bed. Soft. And toys." He pointed to his collection. "You bring toys?" "I did." Gerald's voice softened in a way Irene hadn't heard before. "I thought you might want something to play with." "Thank you." Ezra threw his small arms around Gerald's neck in an impulsive hug. Gerald froze. For a moment, he looked utterly lost, like he'd forgotten how to respond to affection. Then slowly, carefully, he raised one hand and patted Ezra's back. "You're welcome," he said quietly. Irene felt tears prick her eyes. Ezra rarely trusted men. After everything Timmy had done, the shouting, the violence, the fear, her son had learned to be wary. But something about Gerald felt safe to him. Maybe it was the same thing Irene had sensed last night, the certainty that this man, cold as he seemed, would not hurt them. "Come eat," Gerald said, standing and gesturing to the table. They ate in relative silence. Ezra devoured the French toast with sticky fingers, chattering between bites about the toys and the big windows and the fluffy bed. Irene picked at her food, her stomach still too knotted with anxiety to accept much. Gerald watched them both with that same analytical gaze, observing, cataloging, thinking. Finally, Irene set down her fork. "Mr. Carey." "Gerald," he corrected. "Gerald." His name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar for someone she just met. "I need to explain. About last night. About why Timmy, why he was," her voice caught. "I need you to understand what you got yourself into. You don't owe me explanations." "Yes, I do." Irene's hands trembled in her lap. "You saved us. You brought us here. You deserve to know that, Timmy. He's not going to stop. He never stops. He'll find us again, and when he does." The words tumbled out faster now, panic rising in her chest like water filling her lungs. "He said he'd kill me if I ever left. He said he'd take Ezra and I'd never see him again. He's done it before, found me, dragged me back, made me pay for running. And now you're involved, and he'll come after you too, and I'm so sorry, I'm so." Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room tilted. Dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Irene." Gerald's voice cut through the spiral. Firm but not harsh. "Breathe." She tried. She couldn't. "Mama." Ezra's frightened voice barely registered. Then Gerald was beside her, crouched at her level, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not quite touching. "Look at me," he commanded. "Focus on my voice. Breathe in through your nose. Count to 4. She did. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now out through your mouth. Count to 4 again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again." Slowly, painfully, the panic receded. The room stopped spinning. Her lungs remembered how to work. When she finally looked up, Gerald's dark eyes were locked on hers, steady, grounding, present. "I don't need to know what happened," he said quietly. "Not right now. Not until you're ready. Tell me when you want to, not because you think you owe me. Understood?" Irene nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Gerald stood, his expression slipping back into that controlled mask. "You're safe here. There are security guards posted at every entrance, 3 at the main door, 2 at the service entrance, 1 monitoring the elevator. No one gets to this floor without clearance. Timmy Albers won't touch you." "How do you?" Irene blinked. "You know his name?" "I have resources." Gerald adjusted his cufflinks, not meeting her eyes. "I made some calls last night. Background checks. Police reports. Restraining orders that were filed and ignored." His jaw tightened. "I know enough." Irene felt something cold settle in her stomach. He'd researched them. Dug into their past. Seen the court documents, the hospital visits, the pattern of violence she tried so hard to escape. "I've also arranged for you to speak with a therapist," Gerald continued, his tone businesslike now. "Dr. Morrison specializes in trauma and domestic violence. She'll come here, so you don't have to leave if you're not comfortable. Additionally, I have a legal consultant who can review your case, strengthen the restraining order, explore options for custody protection." "I can't afford." "Standard procedure," Gerald cut her off. "Anyone staying in my protection receives these services." It was a lie. Irene knew it the moment he said it. The careful neutrality of his tone, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. This wasn't standard procedure. This was personal. But she didn't push. "Not yet." "Thank you," she whispered instead. Gerald nodded once, then turned to Ezra. "If you need anything, press 0 on the phone. Security will connect you to me immediately." "You're leaving?" Ezra's face fell. "I have meetings." Gerald's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "But I'll come back this evening. We can read one of those books together if you'd like." Ezra's face lit up. "Promise." "I promise." The day passed in a strange, suspended reality. Dr. Morrison arrived at noon, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a calm presence that immediately put Irene at ease. They talked for an hour. Irene told her pieces of the story, though not all of it. Some wounds were still too raw to expose. The panic attacks came twice more that afternoon. Once when a door slammed somewhere in the building. Once when she heard a man's raised voice from the hallway. Each time, her body remembered. The fear. The pain. The certainty that Timmy had found her again. Each time the security guard stationed inside the suite, Marcus, he'd said his name was, talked her through the breathing exercises until she could function again. By evening, Irene felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She put Ezra to bed early, reading him 3 stories until his eyes finally closed. When she emerged from the bedroom, the suite was quiet except for the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. She moved to the balcony doors and spotted a figure standing outside. Gerald. He stood at the railing, his back to her, his hands gripping the metal so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He'd removed his suit jacket, and in just his dress shirt and slacks, he looked less like the Ice King the media portrayed and more like a man carrying weight he couldn't set down. Irene opened the door quietly and stepped onto the balcony. The night air was cool against her skin. Gerald didn't turn, but his shoulders tensed. He knew she was there. "Couldn't sleep?" Irene asked softly. "I don't sleep much," Gerald replied. His voice was flat, distant. They stood in silence for a long moment. Irene studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fists remained clenched even though there was nothing to fight out here. "You saw something last night," Irene said quietly. "When I knocked on your window. When you looked at me. You saw something that made you help us." Gerald's jaw tightened. "I saw a woman who needed help." "No." Irene moved closer, not touching but present. "You saw something else. Something personal." For a long moment, Gerald said nothing. Then, barely audible, "I saw my mother." The confession hung in the night air between them. Irene didn't push for more. She simply stood beside him, two broken people looking out at a city full of lights and shadows, holding their separate pains in silence. And somehow, in that moment, the loneliness felt a little less absolute. Irene couldn't sleep. She tried for hours, lying in the enormous bed, listening to Ezra's soft breathing from the crib Gerald had somehow arranged to appear in the suite. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Timmy's face at the car window. Heard his voice promising to find her. Felt the phantom ache of his fists. At 2 a.m, she gave up. She wrapped herself in the plush robe she'd found in the bathroom and padded quietly into the living area. The city glowed beyond the windows, a constellation of artificial stars. She'd never lived anywhere high enough to see the city like this, spread out and small, manageable from a distance. Her phone sat charging on the coffee table. Gerald's people had retrieved it from her apartment along with some of her and Ezra's belongings. She'd been too afraid to turn it on, terrified of what messages might be waiting. Instead, she reached for the tablet sitting beside it, one of the suite's amenities, loaded with news apps and entertainment options. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Just distraction. Something to quiet her mind. She opened a search browser, intending to look up children's activities in the city, maybe find something to do with Ezra when they finally felt safe enough to leave this penthouse. But her fingers typed different words. Gerald Carey. Irene told herself it was practical. She should know more about the man sheltering them. About his business, his reputation, his resources. It made sense. But that wasn't why she searched. She searched because of the pain she'd seen in his eyes on the balcony. Because of the way he'd whispered, "I saw my mother." Because something in his careful control spoke of damage he'd never let anyone see. The search results appeared instantly. Hundreds of articles. Most were recent business deals, corporate acquisitions, profiles calling him ruthless and uncompromising. The Ice King of the business world. But as she scrolled deeper, past the professional accolades and financial reports, she found something else. An article from 23 years ago. A small piece, tucked in the local news section of the city's newspaper archive. Local woman killed in domestic dispute, 7-year-old son found at scene. Irene's heart clenched as she read. Margaret Carey, 32, was pronounced dead at the scene after an altercation with her husband, Richard Carey, 38, at their home on Westbrook Avenue. Police responded to a domestic disturbance call at approximately 9:47 p.m. Upon arrival, they found Mrs. Carey with fatal injuries. Her 7-year-old son, Gerald, was found hiding in a bedroom closet, unharmed physically but unresponsive. Richard Carey was taken into custody and later released pending investigation. No charges have been filed at this time. The words blurred as Irene's eyes filled with tears. No charges filed. She scrolled further, finding follow-up articles. Investigation closed due to insufficient evidence. Richard Carey's attorney claims death was accidental, result of fall during argument. Child placed with maternal grandmother. She found one photo. A school picture of a young boy with dark hair and darker eyes, his expression already too serious for his age. Even in the grainy newspaper image, she recognized him. Gerald. 7 years old. Hiding in a closet. Listening to his mother die. Helpless. "Oh God," Irene whispered into the silent room. Suddenly everything made sense. The way he'd looked at her blood-smeared hand on his window. The immediate decision to help. The fierce protectiveness that seemed to go beyond simple charity. The security guards, the medical care, the therapist, the legal consultant. The way his hands had clenched on the balcony railing like he was still fighting to hold on to something he'd lost. I saw my mother. He hadn't been speaking metaphorically. He'd been confessing. Morning came slowly. Irene made coffee in the sweets kitchenette, her hands shaking slightly as she measured grounds and water. Ezra was still asleep, his small body curled around the teddy bear Gerald had given him. When the knock came at 8 o'clock, Irene knew who it would be. Gerald stood in the doorway in another impeccable suit, charcoal gray today, with a burgundy tie. His expression was its usual mask of control, but Irene saw him differently now. She saw the 7-year-old boy hiding behind those walls. "Good morning," he said formally. "I know what happened to your mother." The words came out before Irene could stop them. Blunt. Direct. Probably cruel in their timing. Gerald went absolutely still. The breakfast bag in his hand didn't move. He didn't blink. For a moment, he looked like a statue, perfectly carved and completely lifeless. "I searched your name last night," Irene continued, her voice softer now. "I found the articles. About what your father did. About you being there." "I see." Gerald's voice was flat, empty. "If you'll excuse me, I have." "Please don't leave." Irene stepped forward, blocking his path. Not aggressively, just present. "I'm not judging you. I'm not pitying you. I understand now. Why you helped us." Gerald's jaw clenched. "You don't understand anything." "You saw yourself in Ezra," Irene said quietly. "You saw your mother in me. And you did what no one did for her. You opened the door." Something flickered across Gerald's face. Pain, rage, grief, all tangled together in an expression so raw it made Irene's chest ache. "Don't psychoanalyze me," he said coldly. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do. Nothing more." "It was more." Irene held his gaze. "And you know it." For a long moment, they stood in the doorway, locked in a silent battle of wills. Gerald's control against Irene's newfound courage. Finally, Gerald's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. He set the breakfast bag on the entry table and walked past her into the suite, moving to the windows. He stood there, backlit by morning sun, his hands in his pockets. "You shouldn't have searched," he said. "I know." Irene moved to stand a few feet away, giving him space. "I'm sorry." "Are you? You seem quite satisfied with what you found." "I'm not satisfied." Irene's voice trembled. "I'm heartbroken. For that little boy who had to hide while his mother died. For the man who carries that with him every day." Gerald's hands curled into fists inside his pockets. "It was a long time ago. Trauma doesn't have an expiration date." He laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Is that what your therapist told you?" "It's what I learned from living through my own." Irene moved a step closer. "Gerald, please. Just talk to me. You don't have to carry this alone. I've carried it for 23 years. I think I can manage." "That's not strength. That's survival." Gerald turned to look at her then, his dark eyes blazing with something dangerous. "You think you know me? You think reading some newspaper article tells you who I am?" "No," Irene said steadily. "But I know what it's like to feel helpless. To watch someone you love suffer and not be able to stop it. To live with that guilt every single day." "I don't feel guilty." "Yes, you do." Irene's voice was gentle but firm. "You feel guilty because you couldn't save her. Because you were 7 years old and powerless and human. And you've spent your entire life building walls and making money and becoming untouchable so you'll never feel that helpless again." Gerald's expression cracked, just for a second, just a hairline fracture in the ice. "Stop. You helped me the way you wanted someone to help her," Irene whispered. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Gerald stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with carefully controlled breaths. Then slowly, he moved to the sofa and sat down. Not collapsed. Gerald Carey didn't collapse, but sat with the deliberate movements of a man whose strings had been cut. Irene sat carefully in the chair across from him, waiting. I heard everything, Gerald said finally, his voice low and rough. The shouting. The sounds of him hitting her. The crash when she fell. And I hid in the closet with my hands over my ears because I was too afraid to help her. You were a child. I was her son. Gerald's hands gripped his knees. I should have done something. Called the police. Tried to stop him. Something. You would have died too. Maybe that would have been better. The words came out bitter. She told me to run. The last thing she said to me earlier that day was, when you're old enough you run. But I wasn't old enough. And she never got the chance. Irene felt tears slip down her cheeks. What happened to your father? The investigation was closed. Insufficient evidence. He claimed she fell during an argument, that it was an accident. The police believed him. Or didn't care enough to dig deeper. Gerald's voice was hollow. He died of a heart attack 5 years later. I was 12. I didn't cry at his funeral. Where did you go? After. My grandmother took me in. She was kind. Distant, but kind. She died when I was 17. Gerald looked up at Irene, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. I built my empire from nothing. Every dollar, every deal, every acquisition. I did it to prove I wasn't that helpless boy anymore. That I had power. Control. That no one could ever make me feel small again. And then I knocked on your window, Irene said softly. Gerald's laugh was wet, broken. And then you knocked on my window. Covered in blood. Holding your son. Looking exactly like she did the last time I saw her alive. Terrified. Desperate. Trying to protect the one thing that mattered. So you opened the door. So I opened the door. Gerald's voice cracked. Because someone should have opened theirs for her. Someone should have seen what was happening and done something. But no one did. And she died in that house with her husband's hands around her throat while the neighbors pretended not to hear. Irene moved from her chair to sit beside him on the sofa. She didn't touch him, not yet. Just sat close enough that he'd know he wasn't alone. You can't save her, Irene said gently. She's gone. But you saved me. You saved Ezra. That matters. Does it? Gerald's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. Irene reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she placed her hand over his. His fingers were ice cold. It matters more than you know. They sat in silence as the sun rose higher over the city. Two people damaged by violence, finding unexpected connection in their shared scars. Finally, Gerald pulled his hand away and stood. His mask slipped back into place, not quite as perfect as before, but close enough. I need to go, he said, his voice steady again. I have meetings. Gerald. Thank you for listening. He moved toward the door, then paused. Without turning back, he added quietly, she would have liked you. My mother. She would have been glad I helped. Before Irene could respond, he was gone. But as the door closed, she saw his hand come up to his face, wiping at his eyes. The Ice King was melting. And Irene was beginning to understand that beneath the frost was a man who'd been frozen in childhood grief, waiting for someone to remind him what warmth felt like. 3 weeks passed in careful, cautious peace. Irene fell into a routine that felt almost normal. Therapy sessions with Dr. Morrison 3 times a week. Legal consultations that slowly built a fortress of restraining orders and custody documentation. Mornings with Ezra, watching him slowly return to the happy toddler he'd been before fear became his constant companion. And Gerald. Gerald visited every evening. Sometimes with dinner. Sometimes with books for Ezra. Sometimes with nothing but his presence. Sitting on the sofa, reviewing work on his tablet while Ezra played nearby, and Irene pretended not to notice how much safer she felt when he was there. They didn't talk about his mother again. But something had shifted between them. The walls were still there, but they developed cracks. Small moments of connection, a shared glance when Ezra said something funny, Gerald's hand steadying her elbow when she stumbled, Irene bringing him coffee the way he liked it without having to ask. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. On Monday morning, Gerald arrived early with news. "I've arranged a position for you," he said, his tone businesslike. "Administrative work at one of my subsidiary companies. Part-time, flexible hours. You can start this week if you're ready." Irene's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and anxiety. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Gerald's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "But you've mentioned wanting to work. Wanting to build independence. This gives you that option." "What about Ezra?" "There's a daycare on the 3rd floor of the building. Secure. Vetted staff. He'll be safe." Safe. The word carried so much weight now. Irene nodded slowly. "Okay. Thank you." Gerald studied her for a moment, as if gauging whether she was truly ready. Then he simply said, "You'll do well." The office was smaller than Irene expected, but professional. Glass partitions, modern furniture, people who smiled politely and didn't ask questions about the bruises that had finally faded from her face. Her role was simple: data entry, scheduling, answering phones. Tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. Her supervisor, Karen, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Mr. Carey spoke highly of you," Karen said during Irene's orientation. "Said you were reliable and deserved a chance." Irene didn't know how to respond to that. Gerald had spoken about her? To his employees? By lunchtime, Irene felt almost normal. Like maybe she could build a life here. A real life, not just survival. She pulled out her phone to check on Ezra. The daycare sent photo updates throughout the day, him playing with blocks, eating lunch, napping peacefully. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text. Unknown number. Irene's blood turned to ice. She opened the message with trembling fingers. The first image loaded, Irene herself, walking into the hotel building that morning. Taken from across the street. Recent, she recognized the blue blouse she was wearing right now. The second image appeared, Ezra in the hotel lobby yesterday, holding Gerald's hand, smiling up at him. Then the message, "I see you. I see him." The phone slipped from Irene's fingers and clattered onto the desk. No. No. This wasn't happening. They were safe. Gerald promised they were safe. The security, the guards, the height of the penthouse, Timmy couldn't reach them there. But he had. He'd been watching. For how long? How close had he gotten? Had he been in the lobby? Near Ezra? Near her baby? Irene. Karen's voice sounded distant, underwater. "Are you okay? You're very pale." Irene couldn't breathe. The walls of the office pressed in, suffocating her. Her vision tunneled. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. The word came out as a gasp. "I can't." Her legs gave out. Karen caught her before she hit the floor, yelling for someone to call for help. Co-workers rushed over, their voices overlapping in concern and confusion. "Should we call 911? Give her space. Someone get water." Through the chaos, Irene heard her own voice, broken and desperate. "Ezra. I have to get to Ezra. He's not safe. He's not." "Who's Ezra?" Karen asked, crouching beside her. "My son. The daycare. 3rd floor." "Please," Irene grabbed Karen's arm with desperate strength. "Please, someone's after us. He's found us. He's." "Call Mr. Carey," someone said urgently. "Now." Gerald arrived in 7 minutes. Irene would later learn he'd been in a board meeting across town. That he'd left mid-presentation, didn't even grab his jacket, just walked out with his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders. When the elevator doors opened on her floor, Irene was sitting in Karen's office, wrapped in a blanket someone had found, still shaking. The moment she saw him, something inside her cracked. Gerald. He crossed the room in 3 strides and crouched in front of her, his hands hovering near her shoulders. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? No, but he sent photos. Of me. Of Ezra. He knows where we are. He's been watching. Show me. Irene's phone sat on Karen's desk. Gerald picked it up, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through the messages. But Irene saw his jaw clench. Saw the muscle jump in his cheek. Saw his knuckles go white around the phone. When he looked up, his eyes were black with rage. Marcus, he said into his phone, his voice deadly calm. Full lockdown. Now. No one enters or exits the building without facial recognition clearance. Pull Ezra from daycare. Have Rodriguez bring him to my office personally. And I want every security camera from the last week reviewed. Find out how close this bastard got. He paused, listening. I don't care if it takes all night. Find him. Gerald ended the call and turned back to Irene. His voice softened marginally. Ezra is safe. My head of security is getting him now. He'll be in my private office within 3 minutes. But if Timmy knows where we are, he's not getting near either of you. Gerald's tone left no room for argument. I'm doubling security. Tripling it. You're not going back to that hotel. I'm moving you to my private residence. It's more secure, completely off any public records. Gerald. This is not a discussion, Irene. His eyes burned into hers. He threatened you. He threatened your son. That ends today. Irene had never seen him like this. The careful control was still there, but barely. Underneath, she could see the rage, hot and fierce and protective in a way that should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safe. Gerald's private office occupied the top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but Irene barely noticed. All her attention was on Ezra, who sat in her lap, clutching his teddy bear, sensing the tension but not understanding it. Gerald stood at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and lethal as he coordinated security measures. Rodriguez, a mountain of a man with kind eyes, stood near the door, alert and ready. Gerald's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his expression. It's your phone, he said quietly. Another message. Irene's arms tightened around Ezra. What does it say? Gerald's jaw clenched. You don't need to. Tell me. He held out the phone so she could see. You can't hide her forever, rich boy. She's mine. The kid's mine. I always get what's mine. Gerald pulled the phone back and made another call. I need every voicemail from this number forwarded to me. Now. 30 seconds later, his tablet chimed with incoming files. Gerald tapped the first one, putting it on speaker. Timmy's voice filled the office, slurred, angry, possessive. Irene, baby, I know you're scared. I know that rich prick has you thinking he can save you. But he can't. You're mine. You've always been mine. Come back before I have to take you back. Gerald's expression remained stone. He played the second message. I saw him with my boy. Holding his hand like he's his daddy. He's not. I am. And when I get Ezra back, I'm gonna teach him what happens to boys whose mommies try to leave. Irene felt bile rise in her throat. Ezra whimpered against her chest, sensing her distress. Gerald played the third message. You think you're safe up in that tower? You think money can protect you? I'm coming, Irene. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But I'm coming. And when I do, you'll remember who you belong to. Gerald set the tablet down with deliberate care. His hands were shaking, actually trembling with rage, but his voice remained controlled. I want a full analysis of these recordings. Background noise, location data, anything that can tell us where he is. And I want a team on this 24/7 until he's found. Gerald, Irene whispered. You don't have to do all this. He's dangerous. If you keep helping us, he'll come after you too. Let him. Gerald's voice was quiet but absolute. Let him try. He moved to crouch in front of her and Ezra, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I failed to protect someone once," he said, each word carefully measured. "I was 7 years old and powerless. I'm not 7 anymore. I'm not powerless. And I will not," his voice cracked slightly, "I will not fail to protect you." Irene saw it then, clear as daylight. Fear. Not fear of Timmy. Fear of loss. Fear of history repeating. Fear of standing by helpless while violence claimed someone else he cared about. "You won't lose us," Irene said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. "We're here. We're safe. Because of you." Gerald's fingers curled around hers, holding on like she might disappear. "He gets nowhere near you," Gerald said. "Either of you. I promise." And Irene believed him. Outside the windows, the city continued its indifferent rotation. But inside that office, 3 people formed a silent pact, bound by fear and protection and something that was beginning to look dangerously like family. Timmy Albers had made a fatal mistake. He'd threatened someone Gerald Carey had decided to protect. And Gerald Carey never lost. The private investigator's name was Daniel Reeves, a former FBI agent with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. He sat across from Gerald in the study of the Carey estate, a manila folder thick with photographs and documents spread between them. Irene stood near the doorway, Ezra napping in the next room, monitored by 2 guards and a baby monitor clutched in her hand. She'd insisted on being present. Whatever darkness was hunting them, she refused to face it blind. "Timmy Albers has been living well above his means for the past 4 months, Reeves began, sliding a photograph across the desk. It showed Timmy outside a luxury apartment building, one Irene knew he could never afford on his own. New car. New apartment. Regular deposits into his account totaling over $50,000. Gerald's expression remained stone. Source of funds. That's where it gets interesting. Reeves pulled out another document, bank records, traced and highlighted. The money comes through 3 shell companies. Took me a week to untangle them, but they all lead back to the same place. He laid down a final photograph. A man in his 60s stared back at them, silver hair swept back from a hawkish face, cold blue eyes, a smile that didn't reach them. He wore a suit that rivaled Gerald's own, standing on the steps of a corporate building with his name carved in stone above the entrance. "Harlan Voss," Reeves said quietly. The name hit the room like a grenade. Gerald didn't move. Didn't blink. But Irene saw something shift in his eyes, recognition, followed by a fury so cold it made her shiver. "You're certain?" Gerald's voice was dangerously soft. "Traced the payments 3 different ways. Voss has been funding Albers since 2 weeks after Irene arrived at your hotel. He's also been feeding him information, your schedule, your security rotations, the location of your meetings." Reeves leaned back. "This isn't some jealous ex acting alone, Mr. Carey. This is a coordinated operation." Irene felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "I don't understand. Who is Harlan Voss? What does he want with us?" Gerald turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something beyond control in his expression. Something raw and dangerous. "Harlan Voss is my competitor," Gerald said, each word measured like a blade being sharpened. "We've been rivals for 15 years. He built his empire the same way I built mine, from nothing through ruthlessness, by never losing. 3 months ago, I initiated a merger that would give me controlling interest in the Pacific Rim shipping lanes. If it goes through, I'll control 60% of the trade routes he needs to survive." "He's trying to stop the merger," Irene whispered, understanding dawning. "He's trying to destroy me." Gerald's hands curled into fists at his sides. "The merger vote happens in 2 weeks. The board needs to see stability, confidence, leadership. If I'm distracted, if there's scandal, chaos, violence connected to my name, the vote fails. Voss knows that." Reeves nodded grimly. "Albers is the perfect weapon. Unstable, violent, obsessed. Voss found him, funded him, and pointed him at you like a loaded gun. If something happens to Ms. Switzer or her son while under your protection, The media fallout alone would tank your reputation. The words settled over Irene like a shroud. She thought of the photographs Timmy had sent. The voicemails. The promises of violence. All of it orchestrated. All of it designed not to hurt her, though it would, but to hurt Gerald. She and Ezra weren't people to Harlan Voss. They were chess pieces. Pawns to be sacrificed in a game they'd never agreed to play. "He's been watching us," Irene said, her voice hollow. "Timmy. All those weeks I thought he'd found us on his own." "He was guided," Gerald finished. "Every step. Every photograph. Every threat." Irene sank into the nearest chair, her legs no longer willing to support her. The baby monitor trembled in her grip. "This is my fault. If I hadn't knocked on your window that night, if I hadn't dragged you into my nightmare." "Stop." Gerald crossed the room in 3 strides and crouched before her, his hands gripping the arms of her chair. His dark eyes burned into hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You are not the cause of this. Voss is. Albers is. They made their choices. You made the only choice you could, to protect your son. But he's using me to get to you. Then let him try." Gerald's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of an avalanche. "He used your trauma to get to me. Your fear. Your pain. He weaponized a mother's desperation to destroy my empire." His jaw clenched so tight Irene could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "That's war." The words hung in the air between them, terrible and absolute. Gerald stood slowly, turning back to Reeves. "I want everything you have on Voss. Every dirty deal, every bribed official, every body buried in his corporate history. I want his entire empire dissected and laid bare. That'll take time. Then start now." Gerald's voice left no room for argument. "I don't just want to stop him. I want to end him. Legally. Professionally. Permanently. When I'm finished, Harlan Voss won't have enough left to buy a cup of coffee." Reeves gathered his files and stood. "I'll have a preliminary report by tomorrow morning." "Make it tonight." The investigator nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Silence filled the study. Gerald stood at the window, his back to Irene, shoulders rigid with tension. Outside, the estate grounds stretched into darkness, beautiful and peaceful, a lie hiding the war that had come to their doorstep. "Gerald." Irene rose and moved to stand beside him. "I'm scared." He didn't look at her. "I know. Not for me." She swallowed hard. "For you. Voss sounds dangerous. If you go after him." "I have to." Gerald finally turned, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her. "Don't you see? He chose you deliberately. He found out about my past, about my mother, and he found a woman and child in danger, knowing I couldn't turn away. He studied me, learned my weakness, and then he exploited it. I'm your weakness." The words came out smaller than Irene intended. Gerald's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You're what makes me human. There's a difference." Irene felt tears prick her eyes. She wanted to tell him that she was terrified, not just of Timmy, but of what this war might cost Gerald. His company. His reputation. His life. But she also saw the truth written in the hard lines of his face. This fight had been coming for 15 years. Voss had simply given Gerald a reason to finish it. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Gerald reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, so different from the cold control he showed the world. "Now," he said, "we fight. Together." Irene nodded, though her heart hammered with fear. She'd run from violence her whole life. But standing here, in this mansion that had become a fortress, beside this man who had become her protector, she understood something for the first time. Some battles couldn't be escaped. They could only be won. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Gerald's estate, painting golden squares across the hardwood floors. Irene stood in the doorway of the library, frozen by the scene before her. Gerald sat cross-legged on the floor, the billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms and broke corporate empires, with Ezra nestled against his side. A picture book lay open across Gerald's lap, and his deep voice filled the room with careful pronunciation as he read. "And the little bear said, 'I'm not afraid of the dark anymore,'" Gerald read, his finger tracing under the words. "Because someone who loves me is always near." Ezra's small hand patted Gerald's arm. "Like you, Gel." Gerald paused. The nickname had emerged 3 days ago, Ezra's toddler tongue struggling with the full name and settling on something softer. Gerald had frozen the first time he'd heard it, his expression unreadable. Then he'd simply nodded and said, "Yes. Like me." Now, watching them together, Irene felt something crack open in her chest, something warm and terrifying and achingly hopeful. "Gel." Ezra looked up, his dark eyes serious. "Bad man still coming?" Gerald's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained gentle. "No. I won't let him near you. I promise. 'Cause you're strong. Because I care about you." Gerald adjusted the book in his lap. "And when you care about someone, you protect them. Always." Ezra considered this with the gravity only a toddler could muster. Then he threw his arms around Gerald's neck in an impulsive hug. "Love you, Gel." Gerald went absolutely still. Irene watched something shift in his expression, walls crumbling, ice melting, the carefully constructed armor developing cracks that let light through. Slowly, carefully, Gerald's arms came up to hold Ezra close. "I care about you too," he whispered. "Very much." When Gerald looked up and caught Irene watching, she saw it clearly in his eyes. This wasn't charity anymore. This wasn't guilt over the past or strategy against Voss. This was love. Raw and new and terrifying for a man who'd spent decades building walls around his heart. The days developed a rhythm that felt dangerously like family. Gerald worked from home more often, his office door always open so he could hear Ezra's laughter echoing through the halls. Breakfast became a shared ritual, Gerald in his suit despite not leaving the house, Irene in borrowed clothes that fit better than anything she'd owned before, Ezra in his high chair demanding more pancakes. Gel. Security remained tight. Guards rotated shifts around the property. Reeves checked in daily with updates on Voss's movements. The merger vote loomed 2 weeks away, a countdown clock ticking toward confrontation. But inside these walls, something else was building. Gerald taught Ezra to count using blocks, his patience endless as the toddler mixed up numbers and knocked towers over. He showed Ezra how to tie his shoes, a skill Irene hadn't had time to teach, crouching on the floor while Ezra's small fingers fumbled with laces. "Like this," Gerald demonstrated, his hands gentle. "Loop, around, through. You try." Ezra's attempt resulted in a tangled mess. He looked up at Gerald, fear flickering across his face, the fear of disappointing, of being yelled at, of hands raised in anger instead of help. Gerald simply smiled. "It's okay. Try again. You'll get it." No anger. No impatience. No violence. Just steady, quiet encouragement. Irene watched from the kitchen doorway, tears slipping down her cheeks. This was what safety looked like. This was what love looked like. This was everything Timmy had never been capable of giving. Thursday evening, after Ezra was asleep, Irene found herself standing in Gerald's enormous kitchen, staring at ingredients she'd requested from the estate chef. She wanted to do something to thank Gerald, to show him that his kindness hadn't gone unnoticed. Cooking was one of the few things that had always brought her peace, even during the worst times with Timmy. So she cooked. Nothing fancy. Just pasta with homemade sauce, garlic bread, a simple salad. Comfort food. The kind of meal that said "I see you" without needing words. Gerald appeared in the doorway just as she was plating the food. He'd removed his jacket and tie, rolled his sleeves to his elbows. He looked younger like this, less Ice King, more human. "You cooked," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I wanted to thank you." Irene set the plates on the small breakfast table by the windows. "For everything. I know you have a chef, but I thought. This is perfect." Gerald moved to sit across from her, his eyes fixed on the simple meal like it was something precious. No one's cooked for me in I can't remember how long. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Irene watched Gerald take his first bite, saw his eyes close briefly in appreciation. "It's wonderful," he said quietly. "It's just pasta." "It's more than that." Gerald set down his fork, his dark eyes meeting hers. "It's the first home-cooked meal I've had in years. It's care. That matters." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Gerald poured wine, expensive probably, though Irene wouldn't know the difference. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, close but not touching, the space between them charged with unspoken things. "Tell me about before," Gerald said. "Before Timmy. Who were you?" Irene hadn't expected that question. She turned the wine glass in her hands, watching the liquid catch the lamplight. "I was studying to be a teacher," she said softly. "Early childhood education. I loved it. Loved working with kids, watching them learn, seeing the world through their eyes." She smiled sadly. "I met Timmy my sophomore year. He was charming at first. Attentive. Protective. I thought I'd found someone who'd take care of me. When did it change? Gradually. So slowly I didn't notice until it was too late." Irene's voice dropped. "First it was small things. Don't wear that, don't see those friends, don't talk to that person. Then it was isolation. Then control. Then—" She touched her arm where the scar from the knife cut still showed faintly. "Then violence." Gerald's hands clenched around his wine glass. "You got pregnant. With Ezra. I thought having a baby would make Timmy better. That he'd change, grow up, become the man I'd first met." She laughed bitterly. "Instead it got worse. He was jealous of my attention on Ezra. Angry that I was tired, that I couldn't cater to his every need. The first time he hit me while I was holding Ezra," her voice broke. "That's when I knew I had to leave. But he kept finding you. 4 times. Every time I ran, he found me. I changed apartments, changed my phone number, changed my routine. But he always found me. And every time, the violence was worse. The last time, before I knocked on your window, he'd broken my ribs. Told me next time he'd kill me and take Ezra where I'd never find him." Irene looked up at Gerald, tears streaming down her face. "I was ready to die that night. I'd accepted it. All I cared about was getting Ezra somewhere safe first. And then I saw your car, and something told me to trust you. I don't know why. I just did." Gerald set down his wine glass and moved closer. Not crowding, just present. "I'm glad you did. I'm glad you knocked. Even though it brought Voss to your door? Especially because of that." Gerald's voice was fierce. "Voss was always going to come after me eventually. You gave me something worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them, intimate and terrifying. Irene felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She'd sworn she'd never let herself feel this way again. Never trust a man. Never let her guard down. Love had nearly destroyed her once. But this felt different. Gerald reached out slowly, his hand hovering near hers. Asking permission without words. Irene placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, safe. "I care about you," Gerald said quietly. "More than I should. More than is wise, probably. But I can't seem to stop myself." "Gerald." "I'm not asking you to feel the same," he continued. "I know what you've been through. I know trust is earned, not given. I just need you to know that whatever happens with Voss, with the merger, with any of this, I'm here. For you. For Ezra. Not because I have to be. Because I want to be." Irene felt tears slip down her cheeks. Her chest ached with the weight of emotions she tried so hard to keep buried. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Of feeling this. Of trusting. Of letting myself believe that someone could care about me without wanting to hurt me." I would never hurt you. Gerald's voice was absolute. Either of you. I'd die first. I know. And she did know. Somehow, impossibly, she knew. That's what scares me. Because if I let myself fall, if I let myself love you, and something happens, I won't survive it. Gerald's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Then we take it slow. No pressure. No expectations. Just this. Whatever this is. Whatever it becomes. Irene looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. She saw the boy who'd hidden in the closet. The man who'd built an empire to feel powerful. The person who'd opened his door without hesitation because he knew what it meant to be helpless. I'm falling anyway, she admitted. Even though I'm terrified. Even though every instinct tells me to run. I'm falling for you, Gerald Carey. Something broke open in Gerald's expression, hope, raw and unguarded. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles so gentle it made her chest ache. Then I'll catch you, he promised. Every time. That night, Irene lay in the guest room bed, staring at the ceiling. Ezra slept peacefully in the crib beside her, his breathing deep and even. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of Gerald working in his study. For the first time in years, maybe ever, Irene felt safe. Not just physically safe from Timmy's violence, but safe in a deeper way. Safe to feel. Safe to hope. Safe to imagine a future that wasn't just survival. She thought about Gerald's hands holding hers. His promise to catch her. The way he'd looked at her like she was something precious instead of broken. Love after abuse felt like learning to walk on a healed broken leg, every step tentative, waiting for the pain to return. But maybe with time and patience and someone willing to hold steady, the limp would fade. Maybe she could learn to trust again. Maybe she already was. Irene closed her eyes, Gerald's voice echoing in her memory. I care about you. More than I should. For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. The phone call came at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. Irene sat at her desk in Gerald's subsidiary office, reviewing spreadsheets that blurred together after hours of data entry. Her coffee had gone cold. Outside the window, the city moved in its usual rhythm, oblivious, indifferent, safe. Her personal phone buzzed. Unknown number. Irene's blood turned to ice. Her hand hovered over the device, trembling. She'd changed her number twice since arriving at Gerald's estate. The new one was unlisted, known only to Gerald, Dr. Morrison, and the legal team. The phone buzzed again. Insistent. Against every instinct screaming at her to ignore it, Irene answered. Hello. There's my girl. Timmy's voice slithered through the speaker like poison, familiar, hateful, triumphant. Irene's lungs seized. The office walls pressed in. Her vision tunneled until all she could see was the phone in her white-knuckled grip. How did you get your number? Timmy laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Baby, I've got friends now. Rich friends. Friends who can get me anything I need. Phone numbers. Addresses. Security schedules. He paused, letting the threat sink in. How's my boy? He's not yours. The words came out strangled. That's where you're wrong. Timmy's voice dropped to something darker. Ezra is mine. My blood. My son. And you stole him from me. But that's okay, baby. I'm coming to get him back. You can't, the restraining order. Restraining orders are just paper. The sound of traffic filtered through the phone. He was outside. Somewhere in the city. How close? You know what else is just paper? That fancy penthouse security your boyfriend thinks will protect you. Those guards at your office. All of it, just obstacles. And I've gotten past worse. Irene's heart hammered so violently she thought it might tear through her chest. Her free hand groped for the edge of her desk, needing something solid to anchor her to reality. Don't you dare touch him. Touch him. Timmy's laugh was vicious. Irene, I'm going to take him. And there's nothing you or your billionaire can do to stop me. Maybe I'll take him tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'm outside that daycare right now, watching him play through the window. No, the word ripped from Irene's throat. He's gotten bigger. Walking better. You've been feeding him well. Timmy's voice turned contemplative, almost gentle, the tone he used to use before the violence. He looks happy. That won't last. Boys need their fathers, Irene. Need to learn how to be men. And I'm going to teach him. Starting with what happens to mothers who run. The phone slipped from Irene's fingers and clattered onto the desk. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The office spun around her in sickening circles. Ezra. The daycare. 3rd floor. Was Timmy there? Was he watching? Was her baby? Her chest constricted. Air wouldn't come. Her hands clawed at her throat, trying to force oxygen into lungs that had forgotten how to work. Irene. Karen's voice sounded distant, underwater. Oh my God, someone call Mr. Carey. Now. Irene's vision darkened at the edges. She was drowning in air, suffocating on fear. Somewhere far away, she heard herself making sounds, gasping, choking, whimpering. Her last coherent thought before the panic consumed her completely, Ezra. Please, God, keep him safe. Gerald was in a meeting with the merger committee when his phone lit up with an emergency alert, the code he'd programmed specifically for Irene. He didn't excuse himself. Didn't explain. He simply stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out, his phone already pressed to his ear. Talk to me. Karen's voice came through, tight with urgency. It's Irene. She got a phone call and now she can't breathe. We've called paramedics, but she keeps saying Ezra's name. I'm 7 minutes away. Gerald was already moving, his long strides eating up the hallway toward the private elevator. Put me on speaker. Now. A rustling sound, then, you're on. Irene. Gerald's voice cut through the chaos with controlled authority. Listen to my voice. I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose, count to 4. Gasping sounds. Choking. You can do this. Focus on my voice. Nothing else exists right now except my voice and your breathing. In 2, 3, 4. Slowly, painfully, he heard her attempt it. Good. Now out through your mouth. 2, 3, 4. Gerald burst through the building's front entrance and into his waiting car. Drive. Now. Fastest route. Marcus, his head of security, was already behind the wheel. The car peeled away from the curb. Keep breathing with me, Irene, Gerald continued, his voice steady even as his heart hammered. Ezra is safe. I have 3 guards with him. No one is getting near him. Do you understand? He's safe. Timmy, Irene's voice was barely audible. Said he's watching the daycare. Marcus, Gerald snapped. Get Rodriguez to the daycare. Full lockdown. No one in or out. Move Ezra to my private office immediately. On it, Marcus said, phone already to his ear. Gerald's jaw clenched so tight it ached. Irene, Ezra is being moved to my office right now. 4 guards. Bulletproof glass. Biometric locks. Timmy Albers couldn't get within 100 feet even if he tried. The breathing on the other end evened out slightly. Still ragged, but functional. That's it. Keep breathing. I'm 4 minutes away. Gerald used those 4 minutes to make 6 calls. First, his head of legal. Activate the emergency restraining order expansion. I want every communication device Timmy Albers owns traced and monitored. Legal authority now. Second, his police contact, Captain Morris. The Albers case. He just made direct threats against a minor child. I'm sending you the phone recording and witness statements within the hour. I want him picked up tonight. Third, Reeves, his investigator. Tell me you have Albers' location. Tracked the call. He's at a motel on Hamilton Street. Room 247. Good. Send everything to Captain Morris. Coordinate with SWAT if necessary. 4th, 5th, and 6th, backup security, his PR team, and his personal attorney, all coordinated responses, all moving pieces on a chessboard Gerald controlled absolutely. By the time his car pulled up to Irene's office building, an operation was in motion. Irene sat in Karen's office, wrapped in a blanket, still shaking. The paramedics had checked her vitals, elevated heart rate, blood pressure through the roof, but physically unharmed. The door burst open. Gerald entered like a storm, controlled but devastating. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression shifted from Ice King to something fiercer. He crossed the room and knelt before her, his hands hovering near her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" Irene shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Ezra is in my office. Safe. 4 guards posted. I watched the video feed myself. He's playing with blocks, completely unaware anything is wrong." The words broke something open in Irene's chest. A sob tore from her throat, violent and relieved. Gerald pulled her against him, his arms solid and warm around her shaking body. He said, Irene gasped against Gerald's shoulder. "Said he was watching. Said he'd take him. Said." "I know. Karen played me the voicemail he left." Gerald's voice was gentle against her hair, but underneath, she heard steel. "He made a mistake, Irene. He threatened a child on a recorded line. That's a felony. The police are moving on him tonight." Irene pulled back to look at him. "Tonight?" "Captain Morris is coordinating with my security team. They have Timmy's location, a motel downtown. The moment the sun sets, they're making the arrest." Gerald's dark eyes held hers. "This ends tonight." The arrest happened at 3:47 a.m. Gerald insisted Irene stay at the estate, but he pulled up the security feeds on his tablet so she could watch, not the arrest itself, but the confirmation afterward. She sat in the library, Gerald beside her, both of them running on coffee and adrenaline. Gerald's phone lit up at 3:52 a.m. "Morris. We have him." The captain's voice came through tired but satisfied. "Timmy Albers is in custody. Violations of restraining order, terroristic threats against a minor, stalking, harassment. We've got enough to hold him without bail pending trial." Gerald's hand found Irene's, squeezing gently. "Good. I want him transferred to county by morning. Maximum security block." "Already arranged." "Mr. Carey," Morris paused. "We found something else." He had detailed layouts of your estate, security rotation schedules, photographs of Ms. Switzer and her son. This was more than an obsessed ex. This was planning. "I know." Gerald's voice was cold. "That's the other matter I need to discuss with you. How quickly can you meet?" "Give me 2 hours. My office. 6 a.m. Gerald ended the call and turned to Irene. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, but for the first time, they looked like relief. "He can't hurt you anymore," Gerald said quietly. "I know." Irene's voice shook. "I know, but I can't believe it's real. That he's actually locked in a cell where he belongs." Gerald's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "And he's going to stay there. I've retained the best prosecutors in the state. Timmy Albers will never be free to hurt you again." Irene collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder. Gerald held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. "You're safe," he murmured. "Both of you. I promise." At 6:15 a.m., Gerald sat across from Captain Morris and Daniel Reeves in his office. 3 folders lay on the desk between them. "Everything connects," Reeves said, opening the first folder. Harland Voss funded Timmy Albers for 4 months. The payments, the information leaks, the security schedules, all of it traces back to Voss's shell companies. Morris studied the documents with a grim expression. "This is conspiracy. Corporate espionage. Witness intimidation. It's more than that." Gerald's voice was ice. "It's using a domestic abuser as a weapon. It's exploiting a woman's trauma and a child's terror to gain corporate advantage. and I want him buried for it. We can bring charges, Morris said carefully. But Voss has lawyers. So do I. Gerald leaned forward. Better ones. Captain, I'm handing you a federal case wrapped in a bow. Corporate fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit assault, stalking facilitation. Take your pick. The district attorney will love this. Morris gathered the files. I'll start the paperwork today. Good. Gerald stood, signaling the meeting's end. But before you do, I need one thing. What? An hour with Harlan Voss. Private. No recording. Just him and me. Morris hesitated. That's not exactly. 1 hour, Captain. Before you file charges. Consider it a courtesy. The two men locked eyes. Finally, Morris nodded. 1 hour. And I was never here. Harlan Voss's office occupied the top floor of a building 3 blocks from Gerald's. All glass and chrome, designed to project power and permanence. Gerald arrived at 4 p.m., announced and expected. Voss's secretary waved him through with nervous courtesy. Harlan stood at his window, a tumbler of scotch in hand, watching the city below. He didn't turn when Gerald entered. I wondered when you'd come, Voss said. Then you know why I'm here. Voss finally turned. At 63, he still carried himself with predatory confidence. Silver hair, cold blue eyes, a smile that had closed 1,000 deals. The merger vote, Voss said smoothly. You think you've won. I know I have. Gerald moved to stand across from him, no desk between them. The vote happens Friday. I have the numbers. Your shipping lanes are mine. Business is business, Gerald. No need to be vindictive about it. You used a domestic abuser to terrorize a woman and her child. Gerald's voice dropped to something deadly quiet. You funded a violent criminal. Gave him tools and information to hunt them. All because you wanted to distract me from a merger. Voss's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I have no idea what you're. The police have everything. Gerald pulled a folded paper from his jacket, the warrant that would be served tomorrow. Wire transfers. Phone records. Witness testimony. You're going to be arrested, Harlan. Charged with conspiracy, fraud, and about 8 other felonies. Your empire won't survive the scandal. Voss's hand tightened around his glass. You can't prove. I already have. Gerald stepped closer. But I didn't come here for a confession. I came to tell you exactly what's going to happen. First, you lose your company, bankruptcy within 6 months. Then you lose your freedom, federal prison, minimum 10 years. Then you lose your legacy. Every article, every mention, every memory of your name will be tied to this. To exploiting trauma. To weaponizing an abused woman's fear. Gerald. I'm not finished. Gerald's eyes burned with cold fury. You studied me. Learned about my mother. Found my weakness. And you thought you could use it against me. It was just business. My mother died begging for help that never came. Gerald's voice cracked slightly. She died because men like you think victims are tools. Weapons. Chess pieces to be sacrificed for profit. Voss opened his mouth. Closed it. You lose, Harlan. Everything. And you lose it because you forgot one thing. Gerald turned toward the door. The boy who hid in that closet grew up. And he doesn't hide anymore. He left Harlan Voss standing alone in his glass tower, staring at the warrant that would end everything. By midnight, the news broke, prominent CEO arrested on conspiracy charges. By morning, Irene and Ezra were officially, legally, permanently safe. Spring arrived softly. The cherry trees on Gerald's estate bloomed in clouds of pale pink, petals drifting across the manicured lawns like snow. Irene stood at the kitchen window, watching Ezra chase butterflies through the garden, his laughter carrying on the warm breeze. 3 months had passed since Timmy's arrest. 3 months since Harlan Voss's empire crumbled under federal charges. 3 months since the night terrors began to fade and breathing became easier. 3 months of learning what peace felt like. Coffee. Gerald's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. Irene turned to find him in casual clothes, dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. The Ice King had thawed so gradually she almost hadn't noticed it happening. But now, seeing him smile at her over 2 steaming mugs, she wondered how she'd ever thought him cold. "Thank you." She accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing. Even that small contact sent warmth through her chest. Gerald moved to stand beside her at the window, watching Ezra tumble into the grass, laughing at his own clumsiness. "He's happy." "He is." Irene's voice caught slightly. "I can't remember the last time I saw him this carefree. Before Timmy, maybe. When he was just a baby. He's making up for lost time." Gerald's expression softened. "Children are resilient. Dr. Morrison says he's processing the trauma remarkably well." Irene nodded. The therapy sessions had helped, both hers and Ezra's. The nightmares still came occasionally, phantom fears that jolted her awake at 3 a.m., certain she heard Timmy's voice in the hallway. But Gerald was always there. Sometimes sitting in the chair by her door, reading by lamplight. Sometimes already awake in his own room, appearing within seconds of her panicked call. Always there. Always steady. "What are you thinking?" Gerald asked quietly. Irene set down her mug and turned to face him. "I'm thinking about how different my life is now. How 3 months ago, I was running through rain, barefoot and bleeding, certain I was going to die. And now I'm standing in a kitchen that's bigger than my old apartment, drinking expensive coffee, watching my son play in a garden without fear." She paused. "It doesn't feel real sometimes." "It's real." Gerald's hand found hers on the counter. "You're safe. He's safe. That's not going to change." "I know." And she did know. Timmy was serving 18 months for violating the restraining order, with additional charges pending. Voss was awaiting trial, his bail denied, his company dissolved. The legal fortress Gerald had built around her and Ezra was impenetrable. But safety wasn't what made her voice tremble now. "Gerald," she looked up at him, her heart hammering. "I need to tell you something." His expression shifted to concern. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. That's the problem." Irene laughed shakily. "Everything is right. Too right. And I'm terrified because I know what comes next, and I don't know if I'm ready for it." Gerald waited, patient as always. Irene took a breath. "I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, fragile and enormous. "And it terrifies me," she continued, her voice breaking. "Because the last time I loved someone, it nearly destroyed me. It took everything, my safety, my dignity, my ability to trust. And I swore I'd never let myself feel this way again. That I'd never be vulnerable like that again." Gerald's hand tightened around hers. "Irene." "But I can't help it." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You've been so patient. So gentle. You've shown me and Ezra what safety looks like, what kindness looks like. You've given us a home when we had nothing. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as our protector and started seeing you as the person I want to wake up next to. The person I want to build a life with. The person her voice cracked. The person I love." For a moment, Gerald just stared at her. Then slowly, he raised his free hand to cup her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. "Then I'll make it safe," he said quietly. "What?" "Loving me. I'll make it safe." Gerald's dark eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes. I can't promise I'll always know the right thing to say or do. But I can promise I will never hurt you the way he did. I will never make you afraid. I will never make you feel small or worthless or trapped." His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her like she was something precious. "I spent my whole life building walls," Gerald whispered. "Keeping people out. Staying in control. Being untouchable. And then you knocked on my window, covered in blood and terror, and every wall I'd ever built just crumbled. Because I looked at you and saw someone worth protecting. Worth caring for. Worth, his voice roughened. Worth loving. Gerald. I love you, Irene Switzer. The words came out fierce, absolute. I love your strength. Your courage. The way you love your son. The way you fought to survive when everything tried to break you. I love that you cook me dinner and cry during children's books and laugh at Ezra's terrible jokes. I love every broken, beautiful piece of you. Irene's breath caught. You love me. Completely. Gerald's forehead touched hers. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that love doesn't have to hurt. That it can be gentle. Safe. Home. The word broke something open in Irene's chest. Home. She'd spent years running, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. But standing here, in Gerald's arms, in this house that had become their sanctuary, she finally understood. Home wasn't a place. It was this. Him. Them. Kiss me, she whispered. Gerald went still. Are you sure? I'm terrified, Irene admitted. But I'm sure. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When his lips finally touched hers, it was soft, achingly gentle, like he was afraid she might shatter. Irene's hands came up to grip his sweater, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, still tender but less careful now. Gerald's arms wrapped around her waist, holding her against him like she was something he'd been searching for his entire life. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Gerald rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered again. I love you too. And saying it out loud, admitting it, felt like stepping off a cliff and finding solid ground beneath her feet. They stood wrapped in each other, the morning sun streaming through the windows, Ezra's laughter floating in from the garden. Perfect. Peaceful. Home. That evening, after dinner, they sat in the living room. Irene curled on the sofa with a book, Gerald reviewing contracts on his tablet, Ezra building an elaborate tower of blocks on the floor. The domestic scene felt surreal, like something from a life Irene had only dreamed of having. Gel, look. Ezra pointed proudly at his tower. Big. Very impressive, Gerald said, setting aside his tablet to crouch beside the toddler. Did you count how many blocks? Ezra studied the tower seriously. Lots. Gerald laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. That's a good number. Ezra beamed, then looked at his tower thoughtfully. Without warning, he pushed the whole thing over, blocks scattering across the floor. Then he dissolved into giggles. Why did you do that? Gerald asked, amused. Build again. Ezra declared. He started gathering blocks, then paused. He looked at Gerald, then at the scattered pieces, then back at Gerald. Help me, Daddy. The room went silent. Irene's book slipped from her hands. Gerald froze completely, his expression unreadable. Ezra, oblivious to the weight of what he'd said, held out a block. Daddy, up. Help build. Ezra, Irene started, her voice thick with tears. Baby, that's. But Gerald was already moving. He gathered Ezra into his arms, holding the toddler against his chest. His shoulders shook slightly, and when he buried his face in Ezra's hair, Irene saw moisture on his cheeks. Daddy. Ezra patted Gerald's face, confused. Why crying? Because I'm happy, Gerald whispered, his voice breaking. So happy, Ezra. Okay. Ezra accepted this with toddler logic. He hugged Gerald's neck tightly. I love you, Daddy. Gerald's arms tightened around him. I love you too. So much. Irene covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming freely now. She watched the man who'd spent decades protecting himself from feeling anything finally surrender to love. Messy, overwhelming, beautiful love. When Gerald finally looked up at her over Ezra's head, his eyes were red but filled with something radiant. We're a family, he mouthed. Irene nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Later, after Ezra was asleep, Irene and Gerald stood on the balcony overlooking the estate. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights in the distance. Gerald's arm wrapped around Irene's waist, pulling her close against his side. She leaned into his warmth, feeling safe in a way she'd never imagined possible. "I never thought I'd have this," Gerald said quietly. "A family. Love. Something worth more than all the money and power in the world." "Neither did I." Irene looked up at him. "I thought survival was the best I could hope for. That keeping Ezra alive and myself functional was victory enough. And now I think maybe we deserve more than just survival." She smiled through tears. "Maybe we deserve happiness. Peace. Love." "You do." Gerald turned to face her fully, both hands coming up to frame her face. "You deserve everything, Irene. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." He kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. "No one will ever hurt either of you again," he whispered against her skin. "I promise." And Irene believed him. Not because he was powerful or wealthy or untouchable, but because she'd seen him broken. Seen him vulnerable. Seen him cry while holding her son. Seen him choose love over control, connection over safety. She'd knocked on his window covered in blood and terror, begging for help. And he'd given her everything. Not just safety. Not just shelter. But home. Family. Love. Irene wrapped her arms around Gerald's waist and held on tight, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. Somewhere in the house, Ezra slept peacefully, surrounded by guards and security and something far more powerful, two people who would die before they let harm touch him. They weren't running anymore. They weren't hiding. They were home. And that, after years of fear and violence and desperation, was everything. The stars wheeled overhead. The city hummed in the distance. Cherry blossoms drifted on the night breeze. And in a mansion on the hill, a broken woman, a wounded man, and a child who'd known too much fear became something new. A family. Healing. Whole. Home.
Thank you for walking this journey with Irene, Gerald, and Ezra. Their story reminds us that survival is just the beginning, that healing is possible, that love after trauma is real, and that home is found in the people who choose to stay. If this story touched your heart, remember, you are worthy of safety, deserving of love, and stronger than you know. Your story isn't over yet. May you find your own peace. May you build your own family, chosen or given. And may you always remember, the door is open. Someone is waiting to help. You just have to knock.